Welcome back to How to Be a Better DM. This is the show for you to learn how to improve your dungeon mastering skills without the extra time, extra hassle, and hopefully the extra cost. And today, I'm your host, Justin Lewis, here with my friend, Tanner Wayland, and we have a special guest for you. We have Jay Foster from Swole Initiative. Go ahead and say hello, Jay.
Hello, Jay. How are you?
Yeah. Doing great.
It's great to have you here. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Jay, what's something that you've been geeking out about lately?
Man, okay, yeah, so I've been living at conventions for the past couple months, so I haven't had a huge amount of time to like geek out over stuff, but what recently like we were super excited about was the brand new game from and this sounds like an ad read, but it's not. They're just my friends and I love their games. Hunters Entertainment, they launched their Kickstarter for Kids in Capes, which is the latest of the like Kids on Bikes series, and it's all about superpowered kids and like having to deal with being like a teenager while also having to deal with being superpowered and things. And we did a 4-part live play for that, and it was so much fun because it was so different to like fantasy tropes and stuff, and it was really cool to get into. So I've been geeking out about that.
That's awesome. Very Stranger Things-esque, I'm guessing.
You know, I took it in a slightly different direction with the Kids in Capes. So originally I was going to do more of a My Hero Academia style to it, because I'm a massive anime nerd as well. So
that's awesome.
So I was going to take it in that direction, and then I kind of wanted to do X-Men as well, and then I toyed with calling it the Flex-Men because it was Swole Initiative.
Of course, obviously.
And so I was like, no, this is a little too silly now. So I pulled it back. I actually took a lot of influence from The Watchmen to add a slightly darker element to it, because the world that they created was fairly silly in itself. So to add like a little bit of juxtaposition and add a dark side to it. So my big bad was actually based on Dr. Manhattan, with him kind of like reforming throughout the 4 sections. Like there were sightings of him like reforming after this big accident. So
yeah,
that's really cool.
Man, I love that. And kind of like that actually makes me want to ask a question here. So you mentioned the whole like, Flex-Men and Swole Initiative. For a lot of our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with you, can you kind of tell us about your transition from, you were into coaching and, strength training and everything like that. How did that transition into being a professional, game master?
Okay, I'll try and tell the short version. So it all started when I was 3 years old.
Yes.
And I'm just kidding.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
I was always like an athletic kid, although was pretty skinny up until like my mid-20s when I started getting into like strength sports. But I was always very athletic, so I was in all the sports teams and things. But I also was very into like storytelling, writing stories and things. And I'm Welsh, so there's a lot of that in our heritage, is like oral storytelling, short stories, myths, legends, things like that. So that was always in my blood. And then as I got older, I got into theater as well. And so, and now it's pretty obvious, but when I was like last year, I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I was like, that makes sense. But yeah, so I've always been into all of these different things. I wanted to play D&D as a kid, but I didn't have any friends that were into like that stuff. It was all like sports that my friends wanted to do, which was fine. So I ended up playing a lot of like the Ian Livingston Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yep.
It's like 2d6, and then you turn pages and go to each paragraph.
That's awesome.
So I did a lot of that, and then it was like 2019, like towards the end of 2019, And I turned to my wife and I was like, hey, I really want to like play Dungeons and Dragons. Would you do it with me? And she like rolled her eyes and was like, I guess. And so one of our friends came down from Northern Virginia, came down and ran a game, and I just fell in love with it from there. And then it became 90% of my personality from there. So um, so
Yep.
yeah, so then it was just like the further I got into it, the more I wanted to tell stories, and I feel like I have more. This is an odd one. So I feel like I have more to do with the framing of the story as a GM.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't like to say that I'm telling my story, because the way that I GM is very framework based.
Hmm.
So I don't like to take almost any agency away from my players unless we're doing like a one shot under time, in which case I need to put rails on because we need to hit plot points and things.
Yeah.
But if it's just a game, I will have like a framework, which I'm actually trying to piece out so that I can give it away as a template to people as well. But yeah, so I have like a framework of what's like happening in the world that they're around, and then I kind of maintain like what's happening outside of that. But outside of like, this is the world, this is where you're at, these are some NPCs, these are some places of interest, this is realistically where you want to go with the story, and then it's just like I step away and I let my players sandbox in it. So yeah, I forget what the question was, but hopefully I answered something in there.
No, that was absolutely what I was looking for. Uh, and I love how you mentioned like being a professional dungeon master, like you have your own style. Um, do you ever teach anyone how to like be a DM?
So I'm starting to
Yeah.
yeah. So I did, so with my social media stuff, uh I like I started off doing like just comedy skits.
Yeah.
And then as I started DMing more and people were reaching out and being like, I love how you do this. And I'm like, I don't know any other way to do that. Um, uh, and then it was like, well, maybe I should start like giving some of that information out, and then people who are like guaranteed that there's someone who needs like a portion of information that I give out, like even if they're just starting and they just go, oh, that makes sense now. Or like seasoned veterans that I'm like, yeah, this is how I deal with that, and they're like, oh, I didn't think about that, because that happens to me all the time.
Of course.
Like, so yeah, so I'm starting to, but not in like a classroom based like, hey kids, sit down, we're gonna learn how to GM. It'll just be sort of edutainment, like, here's how to deal with this in case you're interested. If not, scroll on, I guess. So, or don't keep watching it so that I get promoted more.
Yeah, that exactly. Like in my mind, I feel like it's a lot harder to teach someone because you know how you were like, oh, I have this framework that I understand kind of subconsciously, but then you have to present it in a nice little package. It's
Yes.
I imagine, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I imagine it's kind of a similar difficulty for like, I mean, you've done a lot of strength training for people and like coaching that way. Like, do you feel like it's hard teaching someone to like grow stronger on their own versus like just doing it yourself?
That's a really good question. So I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
Like I've worked with high level athletes in Australia, so those are like the easiest to train,
Hmm.
because they know where they need to get, and you give them the roadmap and they're like, cool, and they just run with it. Especially like bodybuilders,
Yeah.
like they know that their training is going to be really, really difficult, and it's going to suck for a really long time.
Uh-huh.
But they are so focused on that end result that they will just do it. And so you can write absolutely disgusting programs that like they need to like get where they need to as fast as possible, but they'll look at it and go, whoa, okay, and then just go. When it comes to myself, I am stubborn. I think is the most polite way to talk about myself. And so, yeah, I mean, so when I was a national level powerlifter in the US, and so you know, you deal with some like childhood trauma and things before you get under the bar. Okay,
Yeah.
or you don't deal with it, you kind of keep it in reserve and then just kind of bring it up before you get there. And so now I don't do that, and now I actually handle things. So there's that. So there's growth.
Good.
But yeah, it really just depends on the person. But I will say, like, what being a strength and conditioning coach and a physique coach taught me, which was a question that was brought up at San Diego in our athletes in tabletop panel, was like, oh, you know, what did that, your experience in sports and things, what did that teach you that carried over? And I was like, oh shit, yeah, communication, like succinct communication. Because when you're trying to teach someone this sort of multi-jointed like compound movement like a squat, it's a very complex maneuver. When like you think it's just, oh, you sit down, you get back up, and it's like, yeah, but not quite. Like there's a lot of nuance to it. And so, you know, being able to keep the spine in the most neutral position for that person's levers and structure, and being able to pass the bar directly downwards rather than back and forth and side to side through the movement, you have to, like, it's a lot. And so you have to come up with like just like one or two cues that have to be like 1 to 3 words that will instantly click in that person's head in the moment, and they'll act on it. And so as like as fluffy as I like the descriptions and things to be in like to be immersive, there's also a way of communicating like key points in a very like direct way. Because as like a novice DM, I would I would accidentally come up with an NPC and be like, oh yeah, and he's got a scar with an eye patch on, and then they fixate on that person. I'm like, guys, he's the bartender.
Normal people can have eye patches, right?
Yeah, that's it. And so I was like, oh gee, man. So it was like a learning curve of like what to lean into, what descriptions and things, and also that comes across in intonation as well. So being able to give an intonation where you're just sort of listing off things that are around you and da 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 da, like that, very like blasé, and then you notice, and then get into something, and it's like, oh, what do I notice? And then they like focus on that thing. So that's me kind of, I guess, being manipulative in a little way, but in all for the story. So that's what I tell myself at night.
Yeah.
I mean, the dungeon master is the manipulator of the story, and you know, manipulate really comes from kind of a Latin term, which means to kind of turn with your hand, right? So the dungeon master is the one turning all the screws, pulling all the strings and things like that. So I think manipulation is actually a good thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely a good thing. It's not toxic in any kind of way. Manipulate everyone all the time, guys.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I
if
think
you take one thing away.
Yeah. and I, in my mind, I'm like, you know, we don't think about this, but really the best parties have a lot of experience together. And it's because they have those kind of that easy communication, right? It's like, oh, hey, your turn, you're on deck, your turn's next. Like that's a form of like that expectation that you've set up over sessions and sessions that helps combat go smoothly. Like you'll see this in a lot of the very successful like live plays and like podcasts. You'll see that they play different from every other party because they have their own shorthand. You know, like Matt Mercer, he'll be like, oh, how do you want to do this? That means like, oh, I want you to flare up how this guy dies. And there's a lot of things like that you need to work on that communication. And you know, there was another thing that you said that I thought was really interesting. It got me on this kind of wild train of thought. you know how you were talking about athletes being different because they have a goal, right?
Yep.
I was thinking about that in terms of DMs, because I mean, our whole podcast is about how to be a better DM. I think what makes it hard as a DM is like, what's the goal, of improvement? I think it's harder to imagine, to visualize what that looks like. If you achieve being a better DM, what does that actually look like? And I think in many ways, like, we need to flesh that out when we are teaching people how to be a DM. And maybe even as players, we need to be like, hey, this is what a great game looks like. This is how you can achieve it,
Yeah. Yeah. I think in terms of like pro pro games,
Yeah.
or like performance based games, which is what I do more of. I do like I go out, I get hired out to do like events and things,
Yeah.
and so I'll be like a featured DM and things for a table, and I'll do a couple of tables in a day. So I've done that stuff, and I think that's a little bit different. But things that are like on camera and things, it's very different, because it's also a performance, or it's a performance first with a story
Yeah.
that is also a game. And that's kind of the tiers of like expectation. But when it comes to like a private game, I think a good game, I don't think you can say, hey, this is a good game to just like any table, because they're all going to have different interpretations of what a good game is. And so I think that's why I'm taking the angle of teaching through problem solving, rather than being like, if you want a good game, you have to do X, Y, Z in that order, no deviation, mandatory fun, everyone. Because like my players, like with the network that we stream with and things, they all want to tell an epic story, and they want to have those moments of heartbreak and hard decisions and character growth and things. And some tables just want to beat the living shit out of a goblin. Like that's the main focus. And so it's like, you can't really give like, hey, like this is the blueprint for a good game, which is why I prefer to be like, hey, this is the blueprint for how I prep for a session. And then do whatever you want in there. And then likely tear the whole thing up as soon as your players get involved anyway. So, but yeah, so it's that just kind of, that thought came into me. I didn't take my meds this morning, if you can't tell. I'm sorry.
You're good. You're great. I couldn't tell. It was great.
We will get great insight at random intervals.
Perfect. I mean, it's good enough for me, so it's good enough for everyone else. I kind of keyed on what Tanner did too when you said, working with the athletes in Australia, it was easy because they already had the vision. Now, while we can't really say this is a good game, and in specifics, we can't really say this is a good DM. See you later, Tanner. If you, well, as you are working on putting out this edutainment offering, right? This content that is supposed to instruct and help people shorten the learning curve, very similar to what we do. How would you describe the vision that you want the dungeon masters to have for what they're building themselves to be?
Ooh, okay. So in terms of how they want to develop themselves as a dungeon master, or how they want to develop the table?
Themselves.
I think it's a really good question. It's a really good question because there's so many damn perspectives on it. And I don't want to lead with my way or the highway, but for me, it is, how can I tell the best story, or collectively the best story, my responsibility, in the best way that all of my players get what they want from the game. And that's not maybe every session, but the game as a whole. I always put a lot of pressure on myself because I want my players to have the best time. and I want to address all of their sort of wants and needs from the game as a whole and have that included in there. And I think over time, I'm doing an okay job of being able to do that. But most of that has come down to communication. And it's been a case of when we're streaming regularly, which has been off kilter recently because of convention appearances and things, but when we're streaming regularly, I try to have bi-weekly check-ins with all my players. I'll be like, hey, how is player feeling? Cool. All right. How is character feeling right now? Cool. Is there any direction that you see your character going in, or anything that you wanted to explore based on what has happened recently? And they can then give me that, and then that's up to me to then thread into. And it might not be immediate, because I like to catch people off guard. It might not be immediate, but I can direct the character arc in that way. Because what we imagined in session 1 for like, oh, this is going to be my character arc, there's been almost 100 3-hour episodes in between that. If I'm working on that initial information, like, things change in 2.5 years, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it's my responsibility to stay on top of that. Because if I keep leading the not leading, if I follow the player character's lead, eventually we will tell the best story collectively, because they are so more bought in.
Wow. Let me just take a second and just kind of absorb what you said a little bit. Honestly, one of the hardest parts of being a podcast host sometimes is asking like one question and then getting like an answer that sparks 5-6 different questions. So
that's my brain all the time.
I get it. I see where you're coming from. So first thing I have to say is the biweekly check-ins. That is such an awesome thing. I have to ask, where did you get that? Did you come up with that? Did someone else kind of teach you that, or what? Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right. We're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too. When setting any scene, it's imperative that you tap into the 5 senses. When it comes to sound, one of the best ways to do that is with music, ambiance, and sound effects. And that's why we've teamed up with Monument Studios. Monument Studios provides easy-to-use soundboards perfect for dungeon mastering in any setting. If you want to see this in action, go to fantasy-plus.com and get 10% off of your first month when you get their Fantasy Plus app by using the code BETTERDM at checkout. Again, that's fantasy-plus.com and BETTERDM at checkout. Use music to amplify your gameplay.
I absolutely cannot take credit for coming up with it, because I very much doubt that I was the one to invent that. But I implemented it myself. It was an idea I had. I think it was influenced from so in season 1 of Critical Role, there was a couple of instances where Critical Role basically showed me how to implement mechanics into a game while DMing, and I was like, okay. So I would have that on while I was doing my horrible day job in finance. So when I was doing just computer work, I would have it on so that I didn't have bad thoughts.
Yep.
There was several moments with Percy where Taliesin would go across to Matt and say, I want to do the thing that we talked about. And I was like, okay. So they're having like these off-table discussions with what the character wants to do and the sort of direction, like, or just ideas and plans, and like, because he was so heavily like inventing, that was super important, because it was like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't want to like ask you all of the implications of it live.
Yeah.
This is where I'm going. And so that gives Matt the time to like, okay, like, how do we implement this? Is this possible? And then, you know, come up with DCs or whatever. And so I think I took it a little bit from there, but I don't know. I don't ask like if any other DMs do it.
Yeah.
It was just important to me, I think, from a storytelling perspective, but also like a player satisfaction perspective as well.
Yeah.
Because I'll get to tell my story. I came up with my big bad years ago. Like, my section of the story is going. And I can change things as and when I want because it's in my head. But I'm not in everyone else's head. And so I think that communication is important.
Dang. So if I can go back, I'm going to synthesize from some of your answers, maybe one of the aspects of like the vision that Dungeon Masters should have. And I think it's that you tell a great story, you become a great storyteller, but you also facilitate everyone at the table telling their best story in concert, right?
Yes, you're the conductor, right?
Exactly.
You have the vision of the whole piece.
Mm-hmm.
It is then your responsibility to help each section or soloist tell their individual pieces of that greater piece.
Absolutely. I think I like the biweekly check-ins so much, probably because, well, for one, it definitely seems to me to have some echoes from the athletic world, right? If you have a personal trainer, you're going to have check-ins with them because, I mean, they take their job seriously and they take your results seriously. So I feel like as a dungeon master, it's kind of just natural. Like you're the personal trainer kind of everyone's storytelling. Maybe is that?
Yeah. I didn't
Wow.
even put those two things together. So maybe it came from that a little bit too.
Subconsciously.
Yeah, because I would always have weekly check-ins with clients and things, and, you know, check on progress and like, okay, how are we feeling? What are we doing? What are issues that you're coming against? But one thing that it does allow me to do is to push character boundaries. And I don't mean get into lines and veils and push those. Those are hard for me. Like that, I don't touch those.
Can you say that again? Lines and veils?
Lines and veils, yeah. So what is a hard line? Like, I do not want it in my game whatsoever. A veil is something that can happen, but sort of off camera, or like is implied but not described in detail. So it's behind the veil, right?
Oh, interesting. I've never heard those terms before. That is that is golden.
There's a really good excuse me, a really good session zero system that my friend Elise Resendez invented with her mind brain. Hold on, let me grab it. It's right behind me.
No sweat.
It's this right here. the session zero system. So if you don't know about like lines, veils, different ways of handling like safety tools and things like that, this system addresses those things, but also crafts backstories for all of your players that integrate with the world and with one another at the same time. But it's an activity that takes like an hour, and you kind of go through it. There's a version where you just go through the book, or there's a version where you pull cards. Like, it's great. So
that's awesome.
If you're interested in learning more about session zeroing, look at that system. It's by Mythic Grove.
Mythic Grove. Awesome. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Anyways, you were saying you don't ever want to push lines or veils.
Yes.
But you also uncover issues and things like that.
Yeah. So yes, what I was sort of more pertaining towards was pushing the character to a boundary rather than the player. So the player would be a line and a veil, but pushing the character towards a boundary. So there was like a section where we did without like, oh, in my game we did this, without being like that. There was a section where our sorcerer, who also gains power from a book, like that book was damaged. It was soaked. So a lot of the writing was it was run on the page. And so her access to this being that was granting her extra power was cut off, and she lost her magic outside of her elven cantrip that she just got for being an elf. And so that was a fun thing to explore, but it was something that I could end right in the moment if I wanted to. And the first thing we did, like the next day, was I checked in with her and I was like, hey, is this something you want to explore, or do you want me to end it? Because I can just end it. Like, it's easy. Dry the book out. Okay, everything's fine. But that was scary for a moment, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, this is like really interesting, because it's like, a sorcerer is so based in their magic. Like, what are they once that is taken away? And so we were able to kind of push that along. The same player then ended up using like this highly chaotic magical source mid-battle to force magic back into herself, but at a great consequence. And so we actually ran an addiction storyline, like with that, where she was so addicted to that power that she was deceiving other party members in order to get more of it from other players that had just kept it on them. And so, but that was also like a heavy, like, hey, do we want to like run down this road, or do we want to just have it kind of fizzle out? And, like, luckily I have players that really want to get into like the meat and bones of what it is to be a person.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were able to run that. It wasn't a super long arc. We didn't like drag it out or anything, but it was really interesting to hit. But I would only do that with permission from the player.
Wow. Dang. That again, sparking a lot of things in my mind. And again, I think one reason why this bi-weekly check-in or just this DM check-in concept really hits home for me is because I've had experiences in the past couple of months where I've had two separate players say like, yeah, I don't feel super connected to the world. And like, when you hear that, it's like a kick in the gut. You're like, dang, I failed as a DM. But I also felt that way myself as a player with certain experiences. And I think one of the most important parts of what you're talking about is with these check-ins, you are constantly building the trust of your players in you, that when they allow you to sort of make them vulnerable, you're not going to, leave them by the roadside. You're going to make sure that they have, at the end of the day, a good experience.
Exactly. I want them to feel supported. I want them to explore that stuff. And we do have like a lot of like me failed out theater kids and things. And so we're able to kind of like scratch that itch. Not to make an addiction pun, but to be able to do that, but within like safe confines. where they feel okay to be able to kind of lay themselves out emotionally like that in front of everyone, but still know that everyone wants the best for them as people performing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the moment, when you can't really, like, you're performing, you're live doing a stream, you can't really say like, "Hey, are you okay as a person?" How do
Yes, you
you
can. I challenge that. Yes, you can.
really? Okay, interesting. I guess that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
If you've so generally my like really heavy stuff will hit towards a cliffhanger ending,
Mm,
and I'll
mm,
pace it that way. But I challenge DMs to do mid-session check-ins, and it can literally be end of a scene. In that pregnant pause, just look across to everyone and be like, "How's everyone doing? Are we all okay?"
dang.
Because like if you're really then this is the like performance DM
Yeah.
side, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This isn't necessarily the home DM that's like trying to pull out this theatrical stuff, but it's still important. It's still
Yeah.
important because it might be heavy stuff. You might notice someone looking uncomfortable, and you might be like, "Oh shit, I've accidentally hit on a line or a veil that they didn't know was there." Because they can only be like, "Oh yeah, these are the ones that I'm conscious of."
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
you accidentally hit on something that's like, oh, now I'm having like bad feelings. Being able to stop and just be like, are you okay? Or well, I personally wouldn't target it at
Mm,
someone. I would just say, is everyone okay?
mm.
um and then they have that moment. In fact, Spencer Stark did it during a Candela stream on the Critical Role channel. I know I sound like a fanboy or whatever, but they do great performance. So
Their
I
Critical
admire.
Role, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, there was like this really heavy moment, and everyone was just kind of like shell shocked, and he just looked across and was like, "How's everyone feeling?"
Hmm.
And everyone was like, "I'm okay," and so that continued. But
Have-
you can take a minute if you're live. Take a break. Like if
mhm.
someone's not good, we'll be right back, and then close it. Not only is that like a massive like hammer in your uh to your audience, like emotionally, like holy crap, like that just happened, and then they just went out. But you can give your players 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever they need to kind of process things, and if they have issues they can voice them to you, and then when they're ready you can just jump back in. So I would challenge that mentality.
Dang. I think that's incredibly powerful. Um, I mean, I
Guys,
don't know
it's
about
your
other,
story and it's your players. You
yeah,
are responsible for keeping them safe.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, honestly, on my part, but maybe on a lot of other DM parts, we see sort of these, the YouTube dungeon masters, the streamers, the professional performers, and we miss small things like that in our attempt to emulate them.
Yeah.
But I think those small things kind of make up some of their mastery.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I've done a couple of videos on Instagram where I've done like the steal
Hmm.
this technique from this dungeon master because it's awesome, and let me show you why. And so I've been able to explain Brennan Lee Mulligan doing the in the Never After series. Lou Wilson as Pinocchio is by himself, and he rolls a nat 20 on a perception check to try and read off something. And so, like with that nat 20, he gives him the choice to know absolutely everything about what's in front of him or what's behind him. And so that for me is so good because it draws in a heavy decision that the player has to make that affects their knowledge of the game, but they will know absolutely everything about like the direction that they choose to look in.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so damn good because it produces so much buy-in It's not just like, oh, you see this and this and this and good job in the nat 20, I guess. But adding the choice in there is like, I love giving player choices. Like hard, like, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? And watching like the math symbols in front of their face as they're trying to figure out what they want to do. And then I did another one on Abria during the Magic and Misfits, which Brennan has now taken that technique and used it as well, is the what you don't see or what you don't hear. So she like goes into describing this owl sort of missive flying away from Brennan's character, and then she transitions into what you don't see, what you don't hear, is the owl being snatched out of the air by some figure that is unseen because it's too far away. And it just like blows Brennan's mind, and he's like, what, I don't see that? Like, can I try? And it's like, yeah, you can try. But like those like little things I like picking those things out and like laying it out and being like, hey, like, this is what I noticed about this thing. Like, use it because it's really cool.
Dang. So, I mean, honestly, that's good advice for dungeon masters to, watch, just like anything, right? With sports, that's why we're watching the Olympics now, right? You watch the greats so you can learn how to be great. We're coming down to the end of our time here. So I have two final questions for you. Well, three, really.
Sure.
The first one is to kind of give our audience some action items. Naturally, we talked a lot about story today. Even though some of our topics kind of ranged, it all really comes back to telling a good story, just like, your goals and your heritage. So if you were to give the audience, this is like one or two things that you can start doing today to work on your storytelling abilities, what would you recommend?
That's such a good question. Okay. So good stories are based on a theme that you can explore via characters. Now, it's not always the case because it really depends on your mix of party and what characters they bring to the table. It's not like writing a screenplay. But if you can obtain different characters that have conflicting but maybe not incorrect views on the same theme and explore that as the underlying storyline throughout everyone's personal arcs. I think that is a really cool aspect. And I've been able to do that with our long-standing game, The Fables of Galia, where we have explored fate as a theme. And so we have like agnostic sort of people that are just like, it is what it is. Like, life is just life. We have like people who are highly like school educated that are like, no, fate is just an excuse for choices that are made with consequences. And then we have a cleric of Eastus, which is the goddess of fate, who is like, no, fate is like, it's woven for us. Like, we are just acting out. Like, everything is as it is because it was meant to be. And throughout 2.5 years, they have had this debate on and off about different perspectives on fate. And I use that as like a story plot point to be able to throw things in there that reignite that view. And occasionally the characters have their views challenged and they're like, and you can see them kind of like stutter a little bit and be like, oh no, that's different, but it makes sense. That creates a beautiful sort of overall dialogue for a story. If you're able to do that, I think it's a wonderful storytelling mechanic. The other thing that I would that I gave this advice at a networking event at San Diego Comic-Con. They said they were asking a story. They were asking a question. We're asking a story. That would be difficult. They were asking a question about like, oh, when do you get artwork commissioned for like a big bad? And I was like, well, I don't, but if I was, like, it wouldn't really affect anything. I would do it at the beginning because the big bad is what I come up with. So when you write stories, come up with your ending. And work your way backwards. So, and with dungeon mastering, basically it's even easier because you can come up with your ending. You've got like the big conflict, you know, like where the viewpoints are for the big bad and like what the conflict is internally and externally. And you can have that. And then basically you skip to the beginning where the characters are built and where they integrate themselves into the world. Like, hey, here's a map of the world. Where do you think you're from? And they might point to a place that doesn't have a dot on it. And I'm like, cool, what's your village called? Sweet, that's now there. Which is another way to get people integrated into the world, is have them create within your world. Don't get so protective. But yeah, so then they have their creation there, and then you just have to get them from A to B. So those are my two big action points.
I wish I would have asked that question earlier in the episode because definitely a couple of things that I would like to ask about those. But I don't want to take up all your day.
No, you're fine. If there's something you really want to get into and we have the time, go
sure.
for it.
Maybe this is a quick question. So with the theme, do you share that theme with the players and ask them to create characters around it?
Nope.
Oh, that's interesting.
because I know they're all their backstories because they all tell me, but they don't tell each other.
Yeah.
Which is the way that I like to produce long arcs, because I like to have them self-discover. Because you've got the time to be able to. You can hold secrets because you've got the time to explore them. But I've got the ending in mind, and I've got that conflict and stuff. And so I can take their backstories and tie them in different ways and just like pull little threads towards it. And so if they give me like oh yeah, I'm very educated, very factual, like, you know, I'm straight down the line, things are black and white, and that's the way I see it, I'm like, good. This works out perfectly. But if you can just like latch on to small things that they say about their character and thread that in, you develop that theme anyway.
Okay. Dang, that is super powerful. I've been thinking about theme a little bit myself lately, but definitely a good reminder. Okay, well, two last questions. One, is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners or viewers? And then two, how can people reach out to you, support you, and see what you're up to?
Yeah, I guess that would be that's the same answer, I guess, is places you can find me if you should so choose. So I'm Swole Initiative, SWOLE Initiative. If you're here, you probably know how to spell that. On all of the internets. I have my live play team, or my actual play team, I should say, the Swole Initiative Network. That's on YouTube and live on Twitch. We do various different games. We have a long-standing D&D live play where you can see some of the techniques that I've talked about kind of implemented naturally. Shameless plug. But if you want to see a master at work, come along. No, but we do play tons of different games. It's not just me GMing either. Some of the other cast members, they're friends. Some of my other friends take over as the GM and play games that they want to play and things. And so, you know, we've done Kids on Bikes, Kids in Capes. We've done Die RPG. I think we're looking at doing the Fallout one by Modifius. Lots of different things. But yeah, that's pretty much how you can find me. And then potentially at a tabletop convention, maybe. So we just got done with Gen Con, so I'll be at I'll be at Anime New York in 2 weeks or 1 week, something, a date. Anime New York, when that is going on. And then the next week, I'll be in Florida for QuestCon. I'll be walking the floor, doing panels, and I'll also be running a Daggerheart game for Felicia Day, Anjali Bhamani, Omar Najam, and a couple of other folks as well,
Wow.
which I'm super looking forward to. And then I think I'm good through till PAX U in Philadelphia. So hopefully we will have another one of my Himbo series of games at PAX U. I've got an idea, so I'll be pitching it to them, and hopefully we get on there. But yeah, if you're at a convention and you see me, you want to ask a question or say hi, or I don't know, attempt to slap me in the face, come up, try it. Yeah. No, I enjoy meeting people and sharing stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. On that last one, if you do slap him in the face, you should probably make it count. Otherwise, don't attempt. I'm just saying.
Have quick legs. Have
exactly,
quick legs.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Jay, for being on the show and sharing a wealth of knowledge and experience with our listeners and our game masters, our dungeon masters. For you, Dungeon Master, thank you for joining us to the very end. We're going to be back next week with another handcrafted episode just for you. But until then, let's go ahead and roll Swole Initiative. Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.